Can a diplomatic gesture designed to project international unity inadvertently ignite a massive firestorm of global criticism? The wooden gavel echoed loudly through the grand chamber of the United Nations Security Council, silencing the room. However, it was not a seasoned foreign policy expert, nor was it a traditional head of state who reached for the microphone to address the gathered international assembly. In an entirely unprecedented departure from standard diplomatic protocol, the floor was yielded to the First Lady of the United States. She sat squarely before the world stage, carefully reading from a prepared script that offered deep condolences to fallen military personnel and extended earnest wishes for lasting peace to children across the globe. The spoken words were entirely standard diplomatic fare, emphasizing human compassion and global solidarity. Yet, the immediate reaction unfolding just outside the walls of that chamber was fiercely divided and highly critical. Political analysts and international observers instantly pointed to a stark, glaring contrast between the gentle message delivered at the microphone and the active, aggressive foreign policy decisions being executed by the administration at that exact moment in history. The central conflict was clear. How does a public message advocating for global peace reconcile with the harsh realities of ongoing military engagements and unpredictable international posturing? Critics noted the profound irony of utilizing a highly visible family member with no formal legislative power to deliver a comforting message, while the executive branch simultaneously pursued controversial strategies that many long-standing international allies viewed as deeply destabilizing. This specific moment, originally intended as a strategic display of soft power, instead transformed into a massive lightning rod. It highlighted a recurring, defining theme of that political era, a profound disconnect between carefully curated public relations maneuvers and the actual realities of geopolitical action. The visual optics of this highly unusual address did not successfully shield the administration from scrutiny. Instead, it provided a vivid, undeniable tableau of what many argued was a fundamentally contradictory approach to global leadership. Hello everyone, and welcome to Unite Democrats. Today, we are thoroughly analyzing this historic moment at the United Nations to understand the complex intersection of political optics and foreign policy reality. If you appreciate this kind of in-depth political analysis, please consider subscribing to our channel and turning on your notification bell so we can continue bringing you detailed coverage. Watch the footage closely. The camera focuses on the First Lady of the United States as she sits behind the iconic curved wooden desk of the Security Council. There is a palpable stiffness in the room. She does not look up to engage the audience. Her eyes remain firmly locked onto the printed words resting on the desk. The delivery lacks the natural cadence of a leader speaking from a place of deep conviction. Instead, the tone is flat, measured, and heavily rehearsed. Every syllable feels carefully curated by a public relations team desperate to project a veneer of compassion. She reads a line expressing heartfelt condolences to the families who have lost their heroes. On the surface, these words are unassailable. Nobody would ever argue against mourning fallen soldiers. But the context surrounding this specific moment transforms a standard expression of grief into a highly controversial political spectacle. Listen to the specific phrasing she uses next. She extends earnest wishes for a swift and smooth recovery to all those who have been injured, adding that they are in her thoughts and prayers during these challenging times. The phrase thoughts and prayers has become heavily scrutinized in modern political discourse, often criticized as a hollow substitute for tangible action. When delivered on the highest international stage by someone representing an administration actively expanding military drone strikes and aggressive engagements overseas, the phrase loses its comforting power. It becomes a glaring example of political theater. The delegates sitting in that room, representing nations directly impacted by shifting American foreign policy, are forced to maintain strict diplomatic decorum. They sit in silence. They nod politely. But the tension is undeniable. They are witnessing a profound disconnect between the rhetoric of peace and the harsh machinery of war. The climax of the speech arrives when she declares that the United States stands with all of the children throughout the world, hoping that peace will soon be theirs. This single sentence is the breaking point for international observers. At the exact moment these words are spoken into the microphone, the administration is enforcing policies that directly contradict this sentiment. The international community was already grappling with the harsh realities of aggressive border policies and volatile trade wars that disproportionately affected working families and vulnerable populations globally. To place the First Lady in front of the world to broadcast a message of universal maternal care, while the executive branch aggressively dismantles diplomatic treaties and threatens military escalation on social media platforms, is a textbook example of Orwellian misdirection. It is an attempt to use soft power to wash away the stains of hard, unforgiving policy decisions. Why was she the one sitting in that chair? The United Nations Security Council is traditionally the domain of highly seasoned diplomats, ambassadors with decades of experience navigating complex geopolitical landmines, or the heads of state themselves. Placing a family member with zero foreign policy experience into this critical seat sends a very specific, underlying message to the international community. It signals a deep disrespect for the institution itself. It implies that the current administration views the Council not as a vital forum for preventing global conflict, but as a convenient backdrop for a domestic public relations campaign. The world leaders watching this broadcast recognize the tactic immediately. They see a spouse being utilized as a human shield against mounting global criticism. The strategy completely backfires. Instead of softening the image of the administration, it highlights a profound lack of serious diplomatic strategy. It proves that the executive branch prioritizes nepotistic optics over substantive international engagement. Consider the physical space where this speech is taking place. The Security Council chamber is hallowed ground in the realm of international relations. Decisions made within those walls have historically dictated the fate of millions, drawn the borders of nations, and authorized the deployment of peacekeeping forces into the most dangerous conflict zones on Earth. When a speaker takes the floor in this specific room, their words carry the immense weight of potential military or diplomatic action. By treating this sacred diplomatic space as a stage for a superficial rebranding effort, the administration fundamentally degrades the dignity of the United Nations. The flat, emotionless recitation of condolences and prayers within a room designed for high-stakes global crisis management creates a jarring, almost surreal viewing experience. It is a collision of reality television tactics with solemn global governance. The fallout from this brief, heavily scripted appearance is swift and brutal. Across international media outlets, the headlines do not focus on the message of peace. They focus entirely on the sheer audacity of the messenger. The attempt to leverage the traditional, comforting role of the First Lady to mask an unpredictable and often hostile foreign policy is entirely rejected by the global community. The credibility of the United States takes a massive, visible hit. Soft power relies entirely on authenticity. When an administration attempts to artificially manufacture authenticity through a reluctant proxy reading from a binder, the entire world sees through the performance. The ultimate tragedy of this footage is the lasting damage inflicted upon the reputation of the nation. For decades, American leadership on the global stage, while often flawed, was generally rooted in a consistent projection of democratic values and strategic reliability. This single speech shatters that projection. It reveals an administration entirely isolated within its own echo chamber, genuinely believing that a softly spoken, contradictory script could successfully overwrite the daily realities of their aggressive actions. The world did not witness a triumphant display of American grace. The world witnessed a superpower stumbling awkwardly through a poorly conceived script, fundamentally misunderstanding the basic requirements of global leadership and completely forfeiting its moral authority in the process. The resulting humiliation is not merely personal. It is national. The footage immortalizes a moment where American diplomacy is reduced to an uncomfortable, transparent performance, leaving allies alienated and adversaries emboldened by the glaring internal contradictions of the American leadership. Diplomatic protocol is often dismissed by casual observers as a collection of dusty, outdated rules concerning who stands where and who speaks first. In reality, this invisible framework is the crucial scaffolding that holds fragile international alliances together. It is the physical manifestation of mutual respect between sovereign nations. When a leader actively shatters these established norms on camera, it is never merely a social accident. It is a loudly broadcasted declaration of changing priorities and a deliberate appending of the global order. The recent spectacle at the Global Assembly was simply the latest, most theatrical chapter in a massive, highly televised volume of international embarrassments. A clear, undeniable pattern of behavior had been established long before that gavel fell, characterized by a fundamental misunderstanding of soft power and a catastrophic reliance on aggressive, reality television tactics in the delicate arena of foreign affairs. The bright green lawns of Windsor Castle served as the stage for one of the most visually jarring breaches of international etiquette in modern history. The setting was designed to highlight the enduring, special relationship between two historic allies who had stood shoulder to shoulder through the darkest global conflicts of the 20th century. The meticulously planned inspection of the Coldstream Guards is a ceremony steeped in profound tradition. The monarch, a global symbol of steadfast continuity dressed in a bright blue ensemble, walked alongside the American executive. Suddenly, the towering American leader stepped directly in front of the sovereign. He then halted completely, seemingly lost, forcing the much older monarch to awkwardly navigate around his massive frame to regain her position. In the intricate, highly scrutinized choreography of royal protocol, stepping in front of the reigning sovereign and turning your back is universally recognized as a supreme gesture of disrespect. It was an astonishing display of sheer arrogance. The visual captured by hundreds of flashing cameras was undeniable. The new American approach to diplomacy was chaotic, clumsy, and entirely self-centered. It steamrolled over the very allies meant to anchor global stability. The message sent across the Atlantic was chillingly clear. Decades of tradition, profound mutual respect, and historic bonds meant absolutely nothing in the face of absolute personal ego and a desperate need to dominate the physical space. This obsession with physical dominance manifested even more aggressively within the gleaming, modern walls of the most powerful military alliance on the planet. Deep inside the newly constructed headquarters of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, world leaders were casually walking together across a courtyard, preparing to take their positions for the customary family photograph. These photographs are carefully stage-managed to project an image of unbreakable unity and shared purpose. Suddenly, a hand reached out from the second row of gathered prime ministers and presidents. It violently grabbed the right arm of the leader representing Montenegro. With a firm, highly aggressive physical shove, the American executive pushed the Allied head of state completely aside. The American forcefully inserted himself into the front row, immediately puffing out his chest and adjusting his suit jacket with a look of supreme self-satisfaction. The leaders standing nearby exchanged bewildered, highly uncomfortable glances. Montenegro had just recently joined the defensive military alliance, defying intense regional pressure and immense physical risks to do so. They were seeking democratic solidarity and vital security guarantees. Instead, their leader was physically manhandled and publicly humiliated by the very person meant to guarantee their national survival. It was a playground bully tactic executed on the most heavily militarized stage imaginable. It visually communicated to the entire world that the American commitment to the military alliance was entirely transactional, deeply fragile, and rooted solely in establishing a dominance hierarchy rather than fostering mutual defense. This deeply exhausting pattern of behavior extended beyond military alliances and infected vital economic partnerships as well. Diplomacy often hinges on the simple, universal greeting of a handshake. Inside the historic walls of the Oval Office, seated beside the Prime Minister of Japan, a routine photo opportunity descended into an agonizing display of physical comedy and deep diplomatic discomfort. The camera shutters clicked rapidly as the two men locked hands. What followed was a grueling endurance test lasting exactly 19 seconds. The American leader did not simply shake the hand of his counterpart. He forcefully yanked it toward himself, deliberately throwing the Prime Minister off balance. He patted the back of the trapped hand aggressively, clamping down with a white-knuckled grip. The Japanese leader smiled tightly, maintaining his diplomatic composure while his body language screamed for immediate release. When the punishing grip was finally broken, the Prime Minister slumped back deeply into his armchair. His eyes rolled dramatically toward the ceiling, and he exhaled a massive, visible breath of pure relief. The cameras captured the sheer exhaustion of dealing with an administration that treats every single micro-interaction as a hostile opportunity to establish physical dominance. It was an entirely unnecessary, humiliating ordeal for a vital strategic partner in the Pacific region, proving once again that the American leader viewed international relations as a zero-sum game of physical intimidation. Yet, the most shocking revelation of this era was how quickly this aggressive, chest-puffing bravado completely evaporated when facing a true geopolitical adversary. The glittering, ornate hall in Helsinki provided the backdrop for the most stunning visual contrast of the entire presidency. Standing side by side at separate wooden podiums with the Russian president, the American leader visibly shrank. The broad, highly aggressive posture displayed so proudly in front of European allies and Asian partners was suddenly replaced by a subdued, deeply deferential demeanor. The world watched in stunned, absolute silence as the American executive stood before a sea of international journalists and microphones. Instead of projecting strength, he publicly sided with the rival foreign leader over the findings of his own domestic intelligence agencies. He looked down frequently. He spoke softly. He offered a rambling, incoherent defense of a hostile foreign power. The physical dominance that defined his interactions with democratic allies was entirely absent, replaced by a visual and verbal submission that sent immediate shockwaves through the global intelligence community. These highly publicized moments are not isolated, unfortunate gaffes. They form a cohesive, deeply troubling mosaic of a wildly unpredictable foreign policy doctrine. By actively bullying friends, shoving allies out of the way, subjecting partners to grueling physical tests, and ultimately submitting on the world stage to a major rival, the administration systematically dismantled decades of carefully built diplomatic capital. The strategy relied entirely on treating global leadership as a theatrical performance designed for domestic television ratings, fundamentally ignoring the delicate, often invisible ties that maintain global security. This chaotic approach left the nation increasingly isolated, deeply untrusted by its oldest friends, and fundamentally weakened in the eyes of those who seek to disrupt the democratic global order. The humiliation witnessed in the assembly chamber was simply the inevitable conclusion of a doctrine built entirely on ego, disrespect, and a total disregard for the solemn responsibilities of international leadership. The heavy armored doors of the presidential limousine swing open on the crisp morning of the inauguration. This is the moment a newly elected leader steps onto the historic grounds of the executive mansion, a heavily choreographed transition of global power. The camera lenses are perfectly focused on the massive vehicle, anticipating the emergence of a united partnership ready to assume the highest office in the land. Instead, the newly elected executive bounds out of the back seat alone. He does not pause to offer a hand. He does not cast a single glance over his shoulder. He marches aggressively up the sweeping stone staircase toward the outgoing president and first lady, who are waiting together at the top under the grand portico. Left entirely behind, struggling to emerge from the armored car and navigate the step solo, is his wife. She is completely abandoned in the background of his triumphant, solitary march toward the cameras. The visual is striking and deeply uncomfortable to witness. He greets his predecessors with aggressive back pats and broad smiles, completely ignoring the undeniable fact that his spouse is walking up those historic steps entirely by herself, trailing several paces behind like a forgotten afterthought in his moment of supreme personal glory. The starkness of this arrival becomes undeniable when measured against decades of established political tradition. Entering the executive mansion is universally treated as a joint, symbolic endeavor. Past leaders, regardless of their political affiliation, have consistently used this specific walk to project marital unity and familial stability to an anxious, watching nation. They wait by the car door. They hold hands. They walk up the stairs shoulder to shoulder, signaling to the world that the immense, crushing burdens of the highest office will be shouldered as a team. By leaving his spouse in the dust, the incoming executive broadcasted a very different, highly revealing message on his very first morning in power. The administration was never going to be a partnership. It was designed from the beginning to be a solo act, an administration of one, driven entirely by a singular ego that physically could not bear to share the spotlight for even the brief walk from the driveway to the front door. The spouse was not viewed as a partner in this monumental transition. She was merely a visual accessory, expected to hit her marks only when required by the schedule, but otherwise expected to remain quietly in the shadows. This deeply transactional dynamic transforms a human being into a highly managed political prop. A prop is utilized strictly for its immediate visual value, deployed strategically to soften a harsh public image, project a specific manufactured narrative, or deflect incoming criticism during a scandal. When the leader requires a visual buffer against allegations of cruelty or chaos, the spouse is suddenly summoned to the forefront, dressed impeccably, and positioned squarely in the center of the camera frame. The moment the photo opportunity concludes and the shutter stops clicking, the prop is discarded, left behind on the tarmac or trailing behind on the stairs. The global audience possesses a keen, undeniable ability to detect this lack of genuine connection. The stiff body language, the forced smiles, the visible physical distance maintained between the two individuals on public stages all betray the carefully constructed public relations narrative. Observers witness a relationship that appears less like a deeply rooted marriage and more like a negotiated corporate contract, where appearances are maintained strictly for political survival and mutual convenience. Understanding this deeply ingrained domestic dynamic provides the essential context for the disastrous appearance at the International Assembly discussed earlier. Placing a spouse with absolutely no diplomatic credentials into the seat of power at a global Security Council was not a sudden, enlightened pivot toward empowering her voice on the world stage. It was the ultimate, desperate deployment of the political prop. The executive branch was facing mounting international backlash for an increasingly hostile, erratic foreign policy that had alienated vital allies. The administration needed a human shield. They needed a sympathetic, softly spoken figure to sit in the crosshairs of global judgment and deliver a scripted message of maternal care. They hoped the watching world would focus entirely on the gentle messenger rather than the destructive, aggressive policies being enacted simultaneously by the executive. They attempted to use her physical presence to launder their tarnished reputation on the highest diplomatic stage available to humanity. The strategy resulted in an absolute, humiliating failure precisely because the global audience had already witnessed the inauguration steps. The international community had spent years observing a leader who routinely sidelined, ignored, and publicly embarrassed his own partner whenever it suited his immediate personal needs. When that exact same leader suddenly presented her as the compassionate, deeply involved face of his administration, the hypocrisy was blindingly obvious. The seasoned diplomats and world leaders seated in that grand chamber did not see a genuine ambassador for peace. They saw a pawn being sacrificed to protect an embattled king. The transparent attempt to weaponize a public persona backfired spectacularly, permanently cementing the global perception of an administration entirely devoid of authenticity. They could not fake a functioning diplomatic strategy, just as they could not fake a unified walk up the steps of the executive mansion. The hollow nature of their domestic theater was finally exposed under the harsh, unforgiving lights of the international arena, proving definitively that you cannot use a discarded, disrespected prop to repair a shattered global reputation. Soft power vanishes the moment authenticity is destroyed. The global stage remains entirely unforgiving when a superpower substitutes genuine diplomatic strategy with cheap theatrical productions. When allies are aggressively shoved aside, historic international agreements are openly mocked, and family members are cynically deployed as human shields to deflect legitimate political criticism, the very foundation of global leadership crumbles into dust. This profound erosion does not happen quietly or behind closed doors. It happens in plain sight, directly in front of flashing cameras, witnessed by billions of global citizens who suddenly realize the reigning emperor is wearing absolutely no clothes. The severe diplomatic isolation that inevitably follows is a direct, unavoidable consequence of treating delicate international relations exactly like a chaotic reality television broadcast where daily ratings matter infinitely more than actual, lasting alliances. Every single forced, agonizing handshake, every physically shoved prime minister, and every hollow, contradictory speech read directly from a binder at a vital Security Council relentlessly chips away at the deep credibility meticulously built over past decades. The ultimate, devastating cost of this behavior is paid not by the wealthy politicians seeking a momentary boost in their domestic approval numbers, but by the ordinary citizens who suddenly find their nation profoundly isolated, deeply distrusted, and dangerously vulnerable in an increasingly complex and hostile world. This represents the true, undeniable danger of allowing superficial political theater to completely replace substantive, thoughtful foreign policy. The international community is watching these events unfold closely, and they are decidedly not applauding the deeply flawed performance. Instead, they are quietly, purposefully turning their backs and forming new alliances without us. We truly want to hear your individual thoughts on this entire, complex situation. We invite you to tell us which specific diplomatic disaster you personally believe caused the most lasting, irreversible damage to our international standing. Please leave your detailed personal opinions in the comment section located directly below so we can actively continue this vital, ongoing conversation. If you found this in-depth analysis insightful and genuinely want to help us uncover the hidden truth behind modern political theater, please subscribe to our growing channel. Actively engaging with our uploaded content by leaving a like and sharing this specific video across all your personal social media networks makes a truly massive difference for our reach. Please send this detailed breakdown directly to your friends and family members who deeply care about the future direction of our global leadership. Your consistent, active participation directly helps us bypass the overwhelming noise of traditional corporate media and allows us to deliver honest, hard-hitting political commentary directly to the people. Thank you for watching Unite Democrats today, and we eagerly look forward to reading your insightful comments.